I'm really excited about sharing the afternoon with you this next hour, and as well as Dominique and Amy, to talk a little bit more about equity. So we're going to go ahead and go straight to the next slide and talk a little bit about how we got here. So when we were planning this session, I had not met Dominique yet in person, and it was really just kind of this moment where I felt like I knew her forever, and we have very similar backgrounds. I was supposed to go to law school, she was supposed to go to med school, but we wound up here and really pursuing our passion for early childhood and working with teachers and specifically working with families and children in poverty. And so it's something that she and I connected immediately over. Of course, Amy also, because she shares that same passion. And so when we were talking about how we would start this session, we were really thinking about when everybody comes to this session, when there are so many other great sessions happening, what's the common denominator? So we want you to spend just like 2 minutes, literally, if that, answering, why some of our stories are similar and have these unique intersections and similarities. And so we want you to talk to your takeaways and find out, where you're from, who you are, and then tell us how your stories intersect. Like, what is the common denominator at your table that brings you to this session about equity? So we give you 2 minutes to talk about that.
We all work in programs that serve primarily students of color or students from different socioeconomic backgrounds than the backgrounds where we come from or backgrounds we're familiar with now. And we want to make sure that there are opportunities for students to be represented at all levels.
Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing. We're going to keep moving because we can continue to talk about where our stories intersect. And then we also want to think about where our stories intersect in our programs and in our communities, right? So when you go back, how many times have you sat down with your staff and figured out your common denominator? Or sat down with families in your program and talked about your common denominator, right? So we're all in this room. Our common denominator is obviously being here in Nashville together, but there's something else, there's something more that connects us. And so we want to kind of use this as a platform to talk about that, and then to take that back to our programs. I'm going to turn it over to Dominique. Amy.
Thank you, Amanda, and thanks everyone for engaging in that. Ever so fast. So we want to introduce you to this new book that we are thrilled about. Building Equity, Policies and Practices to Empower All Learners really does focus us on equity within education and very specifically within school environments or centers, programs. And they provide us with a great definition. Whereas equal means everyone gets the same treatment and services as everyone else. Equitable means each person gets what he or she needs to succeed. And I love this definition. I think it is, for me, speaks very much to that wonderful graphic that many of us have seen that I think originated in California, and there are different varieties of it, and we've put some on your tables, of the children looking over a fence at a ball field, and who can actually see the field, and is it equal if we all have the same starting point when some of us are not as tall as others and able to see over a fence. But they give wonderful examples in this book of other ways that we think about equity and how our own environments and schools are equitable and cultures are equitable or not equitable. And you all have one of those cards on your tables, and it has a graphic of an equitable or inequitable situation. And we did want to take just a few minutes to have each of you at your table share what it means to you and and whether it speaks to you in terms of equity or inequity, and perhaps an example that you might come up with just from your table of a ballpark example, as that being sort of the model, and thinking about one that might be specific to a classroom environment or to your school or program. So I think we have about 3 minutes, maybe a little more, 5 minutes to do that. So have some discussions at your table with those laminated cards.
Have you looked at them?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So I'm Jessie. I'm from Washington, D.C. I work as assistant principal at a charter school. And so one of the things that I noticed when I came into the role was that my instructional assistants, which I have 2 in every classroom, were not getting coached really at all. And then the lead teachers were getting coached like every week. And as a result, when we get like classroom observations with class, the scores are based on the average classroom experience. And while, yes, observers are supposed to look at the lead teacher, like, it's hard to just do that. Like, there are 3 adults and 24 students, like, you're gonna see everything. And so one of the shifts I made early on was to start coaching the instructional assistants at the same level as the lead teachers. And we've seen a drastic difference in social emotional results, class scores, academic achievement scores, just because we were giving everybody what they needed. And I've actually even like adjusted further for like struggling teams where my more competent teams are getting coached less and my teams that need more support are getting coached more now because I can see that because I'm in there all the time.
Thank you very much. It's a wonderful one. So now that we've got equity nailed in our all of 6 minutes, moving into inequity, and we gave some good examples, and the data bears out what you all seem to be having conversations about. All the tables that were lit up with conversation. Nationwide, we know that 64% of all children, I believe this was 2016 data from the National Kids Count Data Center from Annie E. Casey Foundation, and also their initiative, Grade Level Reading, that 64% of all children and 79% of children from low-income families were not reading proficiently by 3rd grade. And something is going on there. We know that. We see disparity on income levels based on poverty in this country all over, right? In every community you can see this. Some communities more than others. And we'll see this in just a moment up next. One more slide. We also see this by race and ethnicity. And this, again, from Annie E. Casey, it has data up to 2017, and showing proficiency of 4th graders below reading level by race in the US. We are seeing that from 2005, when it was 88% for Black or African American, goes down to 81% by 2017. And yet, for white, we started out at 61%, and it has dropped down to only, still, I should say, 54% of white 4th grade children entering 4th grade at a proficiency level reading. And that's still a huge disparity between the African American and the white numbers is really striking to me. And we pulled this for national data, but Dominique has this data from Dallas. And we probably, many of you, have it from your own communities. And I'm guilty of this one, of screaming from the hilltops how exciting we've come so far with public pre-K in America. We're really rocking it. Look at the NEAR data coming out in their latest State of Preschool for the National Institute of Early Education and Research out of Rutgers. So we see 34 programs met this new continuous quality improvement standard. They have 13 standards by which they're rating public pre-K programs across the country, which is great, a huge improvement from 22 last year. And I started thinking about it as I was looking for national data to highlight inequity. I thought, I skipped this bullet. 10 programs met fewer than half of the new quality standards benchmarks. And that's a bummer, and that's where I stopped reading. Including states with the largest numbers of children in poverty, in Texas and Florida and California. Those states have huge numbers of children in poverty, and the quality in many of the programs still leaves a lot to be desired. So there is a lot of room for improvement still. And it takes that careful reading of data and an assignment from a good friend and colleague who says, Amy, go look into the national data for that presentation, that you start to uncover inequity that's been there all along before my eyes. I'm going to now turn it over to Dominique.
So with all of this, I'm going to tell you there's a way to overcome it. And that's what the bulk of this session is about. How do we improve, build, or promote equity? The ladies talked to you about what is the Building Equity Taxonomy. It's in the book that we've shared. There will be 2 more door prizes given away. And we'll have our slide deck and our handouts on WOVA, so you'll have access to them. But I want to show you a couple things in this taxonomy. First of all, let's just level set. We know that taxonomies are used to organize information so that we see relationships. So one of the things I want to call out is that each component of the taxonomy is placed in a way that shows the structural relationship with the next component. So that's not to say that you need to accomplish each of these individually, because you should be working on all of them at the same time. But you have to understand that if you don't get physical integration solidified, and then social emotional engagement solidified, you won't see as much success as you move up the taxonomy. Now I want to push you a little bit, because when we think about physical integration, the first thing we go to is race. But I want you to look at the details in the pyramid base. We're talking about ethnicity, ability level, gender, sexual orientation. We have to broaden our lens for integration, because we know that in this country, there were laws that made southern states integrate. There were no laws for northern states. So when you look at what's happening in New York State right now around just the huge segregation that's happening in their schools, we have to understand that they were never by law, right, forced to integrate. That wasn't a big deal in the northern states during the time that those laws came about. And for those of you who are thinking, but it's federal law. Yeah, it is. However, we know that as communities are being built, some of this stuff happens and people aren't thinking that it's gonna happen, so they don't do anything to make sure that it doesn't happen, okay? So now when you look at the social emotional engagement piece, cultural proficiency, a welcoming climate, when you think about the families that you serve, if you survey the families that you serve, would they say that you have a welcoming climate? I will tell you, I worked in Dallas ISD for a while, and one of the things that blew my mind as a district employee was I always had to walk to the front of the building because the parking was so far away. And I thought about, what about parents who are trying to come and pick up their 4-year-old? And it's raining, because it rains a lot in Dallas. Or it's really hot, because it gets really hot in Dallas. And just some very structural things are giving our communities the impression that they're not welcomed, and we're not doing it on purpose. We're trying to provide safe and secure schools, but we may be, right, interfering with how communities and families feel welcomed in our spaces. I also want to touch on restorative practices, and thank you to my friend who brought up the pyramid. I was in her session previously, and we're going to do some work together. She doesn't know it yet, but we are. Because she informed me that as we're talking about PBIS, and you all are familiar with PBIS, there is a part of PBIS that isn't developmentally appropriate for our early learners. And so we've got to change the conversation, we've got to expand the conversation. So I look forward to that and thank you for it. Opportunity to learn. If you are familiar with the work of, I'm going to get this wrong because I get it wrong there, the New Teacher Project, TNTP, they put out a study recently on the opportunity myth. They studied classrooms across the country, pre-K through 12th grade, to identify whether or not students really were the cause of these achievement gaps. Well, here's what the study said, the gist of it, you can look it up, that when given the same opportunities, African American students perform at the same level, if not better, than their counterparts. Why is that important? It's important because when students are not given rigorous work to push them, when they're not given the opportunity to take AP classes, I know that's not our area, right? But it's the reality. And our children eventually become those students. They become the students who need dual credit to become certified and get an associate's degree before they graduate. And so these are things that we just have to think about. So opportunity to learn focuses on that. Think about your human capital, social capital. We brought up a couple things in here about how adults are not being given some equitable practices like training and professional development. And then for instructional excellence, are we giving students agency? Are we giving them the opportunity to be a part of what happens in the classroom? Now I'm going to tie this to class in a minute, but hopefully if you're familiar with the class tool, you're already thinking about all of the ways that the class tool supports this. And then the fifth part of the taxonomy, or fifth component, is engaged and inspired learners. And I want you to think about that as, what does success look like? Because when we are successful in the 4 tiers, our components of the taxonomy, starting from the bottom, what success looks like is engaged and inspired learners, okay? So what we did in Dallas, and I work for a historical early childhood coalition, I'm the director of Early Matters Dallas. We went out to schools in Dallas County, all over Dallas County, multiple school districts, and we were looking for where are there places that equity is making these campuses much more successful. And we didn't find very many, okay? But in the ones that we did, we found some people were doing some things well, other people were doing other things well. Nobody had a market on all of the taxonomy and had it totally right, which is what encouraged me to introduce class to districts in Dallas County that hadn't tried class. So we did a big class pilot based on what I'm sharing with you today. The conversation I'm having with you is the conversation I have with those superintendents, conversation I have with those district leaders to say, this is why you should put class in your pre-K classrooms. So here's some of the things that we found as best practice. And I'm telling you they're recommendations because these aren't the only answers. But they are things that you can try and do. I won't read that to you. I'm going to call out just 2 in particular. So if you go down to opportunity to learn, again, and I'm pushing it because it's important. Ensure complex, relevant, and challenging curriculum in all classrooms. I've heard those same words in 3 sessions already since I've been here, because that is what we know, and we subscribe to that concept as people who believe in and support the class, right? I'm going to take you one component up as social emotional engagement. Use discipline plans that are restorative rather than punitive. Can somebody tell me, why is that an equity issue? Come on, y'all can say it. We all know the answer. Nobody wants to tell it? I'll tell it. Anybody want to tell it? I'll tell it. Right here.
It's disproportionate exclusionary practices. Disproportionate exclusionary practices.
Absolutely. And one of the things that we did at Dallas ISD, and I'm grateful to Derek Little for the work that he does and his team, we had policy passed about suspension in our pre-K and elementary school suspension specifically, because the data showed us that African American children and Hispanic children were disproportionately being suspended. And we couldn't figure out why. Why? What are they doing any differently than any other 4-year-old? Right? And so with Derek's leadership, we took that all the way to the policy level, because in that district, it had to be a change in policy. So I want you just to push yourselves to think about what are some of the things that are holding us back from that success of inspired and engaged learners. So how does class come into all this? Well, after spending some time in Dallas and working with the class tool and some great coaches and teachers and lots of people, I really just wanted to share the intersection. And this is what this slide shows. This slide shows you the intersection between the taxonomy and the class tool. And everything I said to you, if you are familiar with class, as I know you are, should resonate, because the class tool supports and promotes equity just in the way that it's built, just in the way that the tool can be used. And so, I'll give you some examples. For instance, when you think about classroom organization, implementing class will increase access to high-quality early care and educational opportunities for all students. The class tool does not give you the option to exclude any child in your classroom. When they come in and do an observation, baby, everybody's on deck, like it or not. So it gives you and could give your system the opportunity to really dig in and say, hey, where are we doing really well with this taxonomy? What are some things that are working for us? Where are some places that we're doing it well? And where are some places that we might be missing the mark, right? So with that, I'm gonna shift us to do some action planning, because I want you all to walk out, and we want you all to walk out of this room with at least 2 key actions that you can take when you get back to your system that are gonna help you get to goal. What is success? Inspired and engaged learners, right?
So now we're going to do some reflection on our communities. And Dominique has put together kind of a worksheet for us. We planned for 50, obviously we have more than that here. So if you are from the same program, if you'll take one and work together in a group, we're going to have this this piece available on Hula, and so you'll have it as a download to be able to take it back again to your program and share it more broadly, along with all of the slides. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at the first 3 questions on this worksheet. And one of the things when we're looking at ourselves, we're kind of doing a reflection. When you take a group picture, and we take a lot of those now because we've got cell phones, the first thing you do is what? When you're in a group picture, what's the first thing you do? Oh, suck it in. No. Once you take the picture and you're looking at the picture, what's the first thing you do? You look for yourself, right? You want to see, were my eyes closed? Did I suck it in? Was my chin up? Right? And so what we want to do here is really reflect on our communities and our uniqueness. So think about the selfie of your program, of your classroom, of your community, and look for yourself there. So we want to take a couple minutes to answer these first 3 questions. Everybody get a worksheet? Andrea from Tennessee. Thank you so much for sharing. Hang on. Okay, everyone.
Okay, so I was looking at question number 2, and it says, what are some of your experiences, expectations, assumptions, and potential biases with these communities and groups? So I work with children who are affected by the Flint water crisis. I don't remember, I assume everyone's heard of the Flint water crisis. And a lot of people have assumptions of the children that we work with and the families that stayed in Flint even though the water crisis is going on. So that is something that we are really working on, like educating even some of our staff who, live in Genesee County but not necessarily like right in Flint where the water crisis occurred.
Thank you so much. That's a great example. So all of our communities have something that's kind of unique or special, or not special in a good way, like in Flint where they had a terrible water crisis. And so it's important to kind of take a look at your community and look at the lens that everyone else is looking at you, right? Kind of give yourself a filter of how is this being perceived in the country, across the country where parents are saying, gosh, they should just move all those children out of there. Well, gosh, that's not an option for everyone, right? And so really kind of being reflected that way. So we're going to go on to the next slide and look at auditing.
Okay, so if you look at questions 4 and 5, we're basically trying to get you to think about now what we kind of think of as auditing or assessing your current systems and programs, right? And we've already shared some examples in the room of where in your individual systems and programs you might be doing really well in the taxonomy, and then where might you need some additional work. So go ahead and take a couple minutes to just think about questions 4 and 5. It's a little self-assessment. You don't get a grade. Because success looks like engaged and inspired learners. Okay, guys, I know you're doing some amazing thinking, and I hate to have to stop you in the middle, but I just want to introduce the back side of the handout, and then I'll give you the rest of the time to work. So if you turn your handout over, you're actually going to spin off from questions 4 and 5 and do some action planning. So whatever you wrote as the areas of the taxonomy that you might need to do some improvement. And again, this is typically written, this book is written in the context of a school system and schools. But if you are a child care center, you have an organization that's doing this kind of work, it still applies. All of this still applies. So if you wrote down a particular area where you might seem like your system or some programming needs a little bit of work, on the back side, I'm asking you to think about what will be your priority. And then, what are some opportunities? Because we typically forget to think about all of the opportunities that we have, or what are the assets that we already have within our systems or near us that could support us in that priority. And then it's very easy to fill in the challenges box, right? We always know, and go ahead and put a dollar sign as the first thing in the challenges box. We know. And then I want you to think about 2 actions that you can take as you walk away from this session. Because actions are what make the difference. Okay? Now what I've asked you to do on the page is really just to think about the what, who, when, right? Going through that. Because it's easy to say we're going to solve this big, huge problem, but if we never get granular enough to think about who we need to talk to when we get back to our offices, what is the timeline that makes sense on that? It gets harder. Okay, so you have the rest of the session to action plan. We're going to play some soft music and walk around. If you have questions, you're more than willing to raise your hand and we'll come to your table. Thank you guys for attending.